My name is Paul Ronan. I am from Rushford, and I am the very grateful recipient of a four-time Belva Waite Scholarship. That was very critical in kind of allowing me to pursue the undergraduate degree that I had wanted, and in particular in allowing me to study abroad, which was something that I had always wanted to do. But of course, that is cost even more than the normal tuition. And one of the semesters abroad that I did was actually in Uganda, which is a small country in East Africa. And that experience uh, kind of put me on a path of a career doing, um, I guess, what probably a lot of people would call international humanitarian work. But basically, since the mid 2000s, I've been working for a series of organizations that works with community and faith-based leaders in Uganda and in the surrounding countries, to protect communities that are vulnerable to armed group conflict. One of the primary things we do is basically try to protect women and children that are vulnerable, and when they are impacted, trying to provide them with the services that they need to rebuild their lives. So both of my parents are from Arcade, New York, and they met in high school, got married very young, lived across the country for a while, and then came back. And the story is that my father wanted to buy the house right across from Moss Lake in Candia, and Mrs. Hotchkiss, who owned the house, told him several times that she wasn't going to sell, but there was a house down just down the road that was across the town line in to Rushford, and if he thought he could be a good neighbor, then they could buy that house. So I was raised there with my three siblings. I'm the oldest. Went to Rushford Elementary and then to Cuba Rushford for middle and high school. Had a wonderful experience. And I think one of the things that sticks with me about that period growing up is learning the value of small talk, which I learned, I think, almost unwillingly. I have a lot of memories of being with my dad and going to car shows. He works at the automotive campus at in Wellsville at Alfred State, so going to car shows and community events in Rushford and Arcade and other areas, and he would just talk to everybody. And he was so good at just finding ways to find common ground with no matter who he was talking about. He would always find a way to talk to people, which drove me nuts when I was a kid, because I remember just standing around like, okay, come on, Dad, like when are we going to be able to get home? But that's a skill that actually served me very, very well in the work that I do, because a lot of the work that I do has been traveling over to Uganda and to neighboring countries and trying to get a better understanding of kind of what the needs within the community are. And that just means talking to people. And when you're a white kid from Allegany County, there is quite a cultural gap in talking to an Episcopal priest or the leader of a women's group in the Central African Republic or Uganda. And what I learned is just building trust through small talk is so important, and it's so effective in just kind of allowing everyone to see what the common ground is. I mean, I have talked about hunting, I've talked about cutting down trees, I've talked about farming, anything I can in order to find common ground. And that's really allowed the work that we do to progress, because without that kind of trust, it is really difficult to do this kind of work. We never really traveled much as kids. We were kind of Allegheny County and like Western New York. That's where we were pretty much the whole year round. But my parents did have a subscription to National Geographic, and many of my earliest memories are just kind of sitting in the backyard and just reading about these amazing places far, far away. And so I kind of had this urge to travel and to get out. But practically speaking, for college, Syracuse was about as far away as I could go, which was great. I had a wonderful experience there, but I also wanted to take a couple of opportunities to do semesters abroad as well. So I did one semester in Spain, which was amazing. But then I was like, I want to go even further, so I decided to go to Uganda. And primarily at the time, I wanted to go there because the spring semester at Syracuse is very, very cold, and Uganda was on the equator. And I was like, I just want to be warm, and did not think that it was going to be a decision that would influence the rest of my life. But I was also interested in that time in geography, because I was, growing up in Allegany County, the natural environment around us shapes us in so many different ways. I mean, all of my memories as a kid are being outside, going swimming. It just felt like the land around us was like such an important part of who we were as people. And so I was really interested in how the natural environment shaped other people as well. And so some of the research that I did when I was in Uganda was looking at how, when conflict displaces people from their homes and they have to live in these big camps, what is that like for them? Because I couldn't imagine how difficult that would be. And that initial research kind of put me on the path to working with organizations trying to protect people from the types of conflicts that would displace them. I was definitely much more focused on kind of the political and the cultural components of geography. And in particular, again, how does an individual's relationship to the actual place, both the natural components of it, but also how human society kind of changes that as well. How does that influence your livelihood, your cultural beliefs, your relationship to power? I mean, it's I think there's a lot of people in Allegany County, and certainly when I was there as well, that you feel very distant from power. You feel very removed, and you feel like there's all these people in these bigger cities that are making decisions about your life, and that creates this kind of fierce independent streak that people have about, trying to be as self-reliant as they can, and as independent as they can. So I wanted to understand better how dynamics like that played out in other parts of the world, and in particular in a place like Uganda or the Central African Republic, where we think of Allegheny County as kind of this remote region, but many of the places where I've traveled, there's no mobile phone service, there's no internet, the roads are really terrible. Sometimes you can only get there by plane. So these are really isolated places. And I just wanted to kind of better understand, how does that shape how they are able to influence their government? How does that shape how their kind of cultural traditions survive or not at a time in human history where kind of technology is just kind of changing culture so fast. So that's kind of where it began, and then over time, it got a little more practical, because the more that I looked at this, the more I realized, if people are afraid that their children are going to be abducted by an armed group, all of this kind of more abstract stuff doesn't really matter as much. You have to, people need security. And if they're going to protect their cultural traditions, if they're going to be more active in protecting the natural environment around them, they have to be able to go to bed at night without fearing that their children are going to be taken from them. So that's when my work began to kind of focus much more on that kind of basic need. My father, he just retired last year, but for my whole childhood, he was a professor teaching kids how to fix transmissions at the Wellsville campus of Alfred State. An amazing job, not one that pays you a ton of money. My mom owned a used clothing store in Franklinville. Again, a job that she loved very, very much, kept us clothed as kids, but not something where you're kind of bringing home giant checks. So once I kind of got older and was more in urban areas, I was like, oh yeah, we were kind of poor, weren't we? But in Allegheny County, you can be kind of poor and still very rich. You have this beautiful environment around you. So I never felt poor, but definitely when it came time to go to college and you would look at the cost of going to college, it was like, oh man, there's just a lot of things that are just not in my ballpark. The Belva Waite scholarships, when I was going to college, that was like a huge percentage. And it was really the tipping point that allowed me to consider going to a college like Syracuse, which in turn opened up all of these opportunities to travel abroad. I think so that's the financial component of it, which is really important. I think the other component of it was, again, a small town kid, never really traveled until I went to college. And you kind of show up in the city, and there's kids from all over the world and all over the US. And you really, or at least I often felt a bit out of place. Like, do I belong here? But I always had this sense that the community was behind me, that back home, it wasn't just my family. There was this network of people. There was this amazing woman who had owned this cafe in the town that I grew up in, and she saved her entire life. She just decided to give back to the community. So there was this real sense of like, I'm not just myself. I'm not just representing my family. I'm representing my town and my entire area, which both kind of gave me the confidence to say like I do belong here. It also kept me focused on, college can have a lot of distractions, and it kept me focused on like, hey, I can't let people down. I need to make the best use of this. That study abroad experience, and I went there thinking I was going to do research on one thing, and then as I talked about before, as these experiences kind of have often do, you kind of go with this very specific set of this is what I'm going to do, and then as you're there, you just kind of have to allow yourself to be open to the experience and where it takes you, and it took me in a very different direction, but one that I'm very grateful for. But a couple of things that I think were really important. One is it was a huge confidence boost for me. Because again, coming from a small town, was always kind of a quiet kid. And then you go to college and it's people from all these other places. And even if you feel like you belong, that doesn't mean that you're confident enough to like speak up and be a leader and be aggressive, trying to pursue what you want. But being in Uganda at that young of an age, when things were that different than anything I had ever experienced, you're just kind of thrown into the fire, and in very kind of practical ways. So one of the things about the capital city of Kampala is the traffic is crazy. The traffic is insane. There's no traffic rules. People drive really fast, and you just kind of have to figure it out. And I remember standing on one side of a busy road, like the second day I was there, and trying to cross the street, and the cars were going so fast, they were not stopping. And I was like, I don't know how to cross the street. This is crazy. And this kind Ugandan man just kind of walked up to me and he was like, okay, look, when the cars are about there, then that's when you know you got to go. Like, you'll make it. Nobody's going to hit you. You're going to be fine. And I did. And then within a week, I was crossing the street without a second thought. And then as my kind of career progressed, those kind of challenges kind of ramped up. And within a few years, I was traveling to areas of the Central African Republic that were controlled by armed groups and setting up interviews with rebel commanders with like bandoliers across their chest and just kind of talking with them about, why they were fighting and trying to get a better understanding of what we could be doing to try to prevent the fighting from spilling over onto the lives of like normal people. And if you would have, kind of told my 18-year-old self that's what I would be doing in 6 years, I would have not believed it. But that's what the experience did, is it just allowed me to have the confidence to go ahead and do those type of things. Which again, the scholarships were a huge piece of making that possible. Yeah, I think the story that really sticks out for me, which was, I think I would have been in my mid-20s, working in my first job, kind of doing this work where I was traveling out to conflict affected areas. I was in the Central African Republic, and I was trying to get a better understanding of how communities were being impacted by a rebel group called the Lord's Resistance Army, or the LRA, which is very infamous for abducting young kids and then taking them to these remote bases deep in the bush and forcing them to be child soldiers. And I went to a town that had been attacked by the LRA within the last few months. And um, and I ended up doing an interview with a father who was both a teacher and a hunter. My father was a teacher, so being a teacher, that was an identity that very much resonated with me. Hunting, also a huge part of the culture in Allegany County and in my family. And he was just a guy that I felt like in different circumstances could have been my neighbor. And he just kind of walked me through the whole story of how he had been out hunting because school was on break, and he was out for a few days, and then he came back, and in that time the LRA had attacked his town and abducted his young son, and how he then spent the next few days kind of tracking the group, trying to see if there was a way that he could get his son back. And he did manage to track them, but he was never able to get, at least at the time that I had talked to him, he hadn't been able to find a way to free his son. And he just told me the story in such detail and with such heart. And it was just a moment where I was like, I don't want other people to have to tell stories like this. I want this to stop. And of course, at that age, you're very, very naive. You think that you can change the world very quickly. That's not actually how it works. But over the years, the work that we have done, I think, has had an important impact. But that's the story that I think until my last days, I will always remember that. After I first graduated, I didn't have any job prospects right at that moment. So I decided to go to Alaska, and I worked in a fish cannery with a college buddy for the summer, which was great. I had a lot of fun, but was not something that I think I wanted to do full time. And then through one of the people I had studied abroad with, I heard about a job opportunity working for Franciscans International, which is kind of a Catholic peace building group based in New York City. And I was raised Catholic myself, and so that kind of tradition I very much identified with. And with the recommendation of this person that I had been abroad with in Uganda, was able to get the job. And it was an internship. I was living in Brooklyn on a stipend of like $750 a month. So I was living in this tiny apartment and eating ramen noodles every day. But it was a chance to get exposed to this type of work of advocating with policymakers at the United Nations about things that they could be doing to prevent the conflict in Uganda with the Lord's Resistance Army and in the neighboring countries as well. So I did that for about a year and a half. Kind of wasn't really impressed with how much could be done at the United Nations. So I stopped working there. I moved back home. I mowed lawns with one of my high school teachers for the rest of the summer. And then along with a couple of other people that I had met on the study abroad, ended up founding our own organization to do the type of peace building and advocacy work that we thought would make more of a difference, and then ended up moving to Washington, D.C. to work full time there, and was in D.C. for 8 years, and then eventually wanted to move back home. So I moved to Buffalo, and now do this same type of work, but mostly remotely. So the Resolve LRA Crisis Initiative, we were young, we were not very good at branding. That's kind of a long name. But that was the organization that I helped to found in DC. So we were kind of, what I guess you would call like a peace building startup. Not nearly as much money in that as in a Silicon Valley startup, but we really enjoyed it. And that was so what we were trying to do at the time is trying to find a way to make the reality of the conflict that we were seeing in Uganda with the Lord's Resistance Army um, resonate more with people in the US, because it is hard if you haven't been over there and you haven't seen it face to face, it can feel very, very distant. So what we were doing at that time was doing a lot of meetings with members of Congress, trying to convince them that they should care. And what we kept hearing was, yeah, we would love to care, but unless my constituents care, I'm here to represent them. So then we ended up partnering with another organization called Invisible Children, which was focused on the LRA issue as well, but focused more on mobilizing mostly high school and college kids to care about this, but didn't really have an idea of what they were going to do with all of that momentum. So it was kind of a match made in heaven, and they were doing all this great mobilization, and then we were kind of setting up meetings for all of these high school kids and college kids and teachers and church leaders with their members of Congress to say, hey, this is an issue that we are your constituents, and we want you to do something about that. So what that led to in 2010 was the passage of a bipartisan bill in Congress. That was a really incredible moment, because we had worked for years and years and years. We knew we wanted this to be bipartisan. We didn't want this to become a partisan football. So we had Democrats, we had Republicans, which sounds very idealistic in an environment like today, but we were able to do it back then. And that kind of culminated in this amazing moment where we got to go into the White House and meet President Obama as he signed the bill. And that was, I mean, a life-changing moment just to be able to experience something like that. And we really appreciated, both what the bipartisan members of Congress were doing, but also how the Obama administration responded. But at the same time, we were like, hey, we got to keep their feet to the fire. So that's when I started to do more of the work going out into the field to talk to communities and talk to rebel commanders and talk to the U.S. military about what's the actual progress being made after the bill was passed. Okay, we had this wonderful moment, everyone feels good, but now we actually have to change lives. And so the crisis tracker was a big part of that, because if you're trying to succeed, you need a metric to help you track whether you're being successful. And again, we didn't want it to be lost. Like, we spent this much money trying to address the conflict. That's fine. But is the conflict actually being addressed? And we thought the best way to do that would be to track the number of LRA attacks, as well as the number of children that were being abducted over time, so that you could see, if the LRA is committing fewer attacks, then that what's being done is working. If attacks are not reducing, then all the flowery rhetoric in the world doesn't mean anything. So that's what the crisis tracker was, is it was a way for us to kind of hold politicians in the US accountable to the promises that they had made. So when I first was doing this work in the early 2010s and the late 2000s, the LRA was abducting thousands of children and adults a year, sometimes killing thousands of people. There were a number of very well documented tragic, like, massacres, including ones where they targeted people that were in churches celebrating Christmas in 2008 and 2009. And it was a group that was basically able to do whatever it wanted. And at that time, due to the rather evil, like, leadership that it had, that's what it was doing. So when we were able to kind of encourage the passing of the bill in 2010, that really ramped up both US efforts and the efforts of the United Nations and other entities to be responding. And one of the things that we were very clear on is, yes, there is kind of the senior commanders that are the bad guys, are ordering everyone to are kind of ordering these awful massacres. But most of the lower level combatants within the group were children that had been abducted themselves and were being forced to do this. So what we didn't want was kind of a military only approach in which you're just trying to kill everyone in the group, because most of the people in the group were abducted kids, including women and kids. So this is an armed group that it's not just armed men. It's kind of families. So we were really encouraging kind of a four-part approach, which is what the administration ended up doing, which was to capture the senior leaders, find ways to encourage peaceful defections, from the lower level combatants, as well as the senior commanders where that was possible, and all the women and the very small kids, and then provide humanitarian assistance to communities that were being displaced, and then finally to help communities kind of protect themselves from these attacks, because if they were able to prevent the LRA from abducting more kids, then the LRA would slowly get weaker and weaker. And it took a long time, but that strategy, which we were kind of a small piece of, but it was U.S. government, it was the UN, it was dozens of very heroic local leaders and, like, organizations on the front lines of this work, and the number of LRA attacks, as documented via like the crisis tracker, has dropped dramatically. to the point where in the mid 2020s there was a few years with no LRA attacks at all. This year actually there has been a slight uptick. So there's been about 30 children and youth that have been abducted by the LRA since Easter, which is very tragic. We're doing everything we can to respond to that. But again, compared to having thousands a year being abducted and killed, it is way better than it was. Unfortunately, in a lot of the areas where the LRA operates, these were areas where kind of state control and provision of basic security and basic services has been really, really weak. So there have been other armed groups that have kind of stepped into the vacuum left by the LRA. So now our work is kind of broader, trying to be responsive to kind of a more holistic set of needs within the communities. I have been to Africa enough times that I have had to kind of get a new passport because it gets filled up with all of these stamps. So I can't say for sure. I would say probably between 15 and 20. Um, over since the pandemic kind of started to limit my travel in 2020, and then in 2021 my wife and I had our first child, and my appetite for going off into the bush and talking to rebel groups really took a dive once I had a little baby at home that was waiting for me. I became a little more risk averse. So I haven't been traveling as much in the last few years. But that was a big part of my life for basically my entire 20s and the first half of my 30s. I think that I'm gonna circle back to this idea of small talk, because one of the most important um, ways that this work has transformed me is to really give me a sense that no matter where you go in the world, people are just people. And I think if you took my neighbor from back home who is a farmer who traveled even less than my family did. I think if I sat him down with some of the people that I have had a chance to meet in these really remote areas where I've worked, I think there would be like 10, 15 minutes of like kind of like sizing each other up, and then they'd be talking about farming, or they'd be talking about church, or they'd be talking about whatever. And what it's taught me is like you can be in the middle of Central Africa, people that could not look more different than you, could not dress more different than you. Their music is different, everything is different. But if you're just able to find time and sit and have some small talk, you're gonna find a way to connect with people. And I think that that's just given me this sense that we share this giant planet, and there are so many things and so many people and so many ideas that are trying to divide us and make us hate each other and point fingers at each other and blame each other for things. And, obviously people that do things that are wrong should be held accountable, but that sense of shared humanity is really something that I feel, because I have had to find that common ground in so many different places with so many different people. So a big part of the work that we've been doing in the last few years is really trying to invest in our local partners, um, to kind of be building their capacity to be doing as much of this work as they can. And I always try to kind of do a thought experiment of, if God forbid there was an armed group running around Allegany County, and there was conflict and people were displaced and all this stuff was happening. And if there was some well-meaning, rich organization in Uganda that wanted to come to Allegheny County and help things out, my first advice to them would be like, hey, talk to people in Allegheny County, let them be doing the work. You can support us, you can bring in your technical expertise and all of that, but you're never going to understand this place as much as we are. And I think that sometimes there can be a tendency with doing this kind of international humanitarian work of like, we will do it, we're faster, we're have had a chance to go to college and do all this stuff. And there can be kind of a well-intentioned arrogance that comes out of that of I'm gonna come in and fix your problem. And in the short term, maybe that works in some ways, but that's never going to last. So a lot of the work that we've been doing in the last few years has been really trying to build the capacity and the leadership of people who are from the regions where we work to be continuing to do this work with kind of minimal support from organizations like us. And we have always found there is no shortage of really thoughtful, passionate, energetic people with great ideas about how to do this work if someone just listens to them. They can be church leaders, they can be mosque leaders, they can be teachers, women's group leaders, youth group leaders. Like you just have to have patience to listen to them and help them do the work. So in a lot of the areas where we work over time, as armed groups have been fighting, often the armed groups recruit from particular religious denominations or particular ethnic groups, or there's a lot of kind of conflict between people that are pastoralist versus people that are farmers. So the armed conflict ends up creating these broader intercommunal tensions between Christians and Muslims, farmers and herders, people of different ethnic groups. So a lot of the work that we do now is trying to find ways to help local leaders reduce tensions between different groups so that when herders' cattle accidentally run through a farmer's field, they can resolve that dispute peacefully without letting it kind of spiral into a broader conflict. And then a lot of what we do is still kind of even though LRA abductions have reduced in the last few years, there has been a slight increase, and there's still people that were abducted a decade or so ago that are just being able to escape now. So the Mother's Day campaigns, we were raising funds at that time because we have had a bunch of women and children escape from the LRA and they escaped far, far from home. So we are trying to help make sure that they're able to be reunited with their families. I think two that come to mind. One would be being invited into the Oval Office with President Obama to watch him sign a bill that I had fought for years to get passed, and then knowing that this bill was going to change the lives of people that I cared very, very much about. That was an incredible moment. I think another one, and this also falls into kind of the confidence building life lesson category as well, is early on in the years when I was traveling out to regions that had been affected by the LRA. I was in a small town called Inzara in South Sudan, and there was military commanders there who were kind of part of efforts to try to capture senior LRA leaders. And I wanted to interview them to get a better understanding of what could be done to improve what they were doing and to try to encourage them to do more to protect civilians from the LRA. And I went to the military base. Some lower level officer was just like, "Who are you?" This like white dude that shows up at the gate of our camp. Like, no, we're not going to talk to you. And I kind of just put my tail between my legs and walked away. And this town was so small, there was no hotel or anything like that. So I had arranged to stay in the guest house of a group of Italian Comboni missionaries who had been based there for decades. And they were led by a woman called Sister Giovanna, and she had the thickest Italian accent and was, I mean, Italian in every way, like the way that she talked and used her hands, and she was very passionate. And she was, I mean, probably up to my chest. She was very short, but she was just a firecracker. And when I came back that night and said, "Yeah, I tried to get this interview, but they wouldn't talk to me," and she goes, "Paul, you're gonna talk to them. We'll go in the morning." And she walked and she came with me. She walked right into the camp, walked past the junior officer that had turned me around, went right into the general's tent, and she told the general, and he was, I mean, probably 6'4", but in the face of this Italian nun, he was just like, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "If you want to get invited to our mission to eat Sunday spaghetti dinners, you will talk to this young man." And then she just walked away. And the general and I were just like, "Well, I guess this is happening because neither of us is going to mess with her." And and had a very good interview, and it was very productive. But what it taught me was just, again, just to have confidence to go after what you have, and when in doubt, never mess with old Italian nuns because they are something else. As far as how it would benefit them, again, I'll just return to the idea of confidence. I mean, once you have navigated a city or a rural environment in a part of the world you've never been to and figured that out, you come back home and you're just like, yeah, whatever challenge I find here, I can deal with it. Like I was just interviewing a rebel commander with the bandolier across his chest a few weeks ago. Like I'm not going to be intimidated or scared off by anything now. Another way that it benefits you, I think, is you really learn how to think creatively to solve problems. I was once driving in a very remote region in a very old car, trying to reach a town that had been impacted by the LRA, and the axle to the car just broke. It was a rough road, and at some point it just broke. And the driver stayed very calm. I was panicking. It was about to get dark. We're in the, like the road is like an Allegany County road where there's just trees and fields on all sides. I was like, are we going to be sleeping here? And he just calmly, he kind of found a piece of the axle, looked at it, and found a tree about the same size and cut down the tree and ended up, I still don't understand. I did not inherit any of my father's knack for cars, but he found a way to basically use the trunk of a tree to replace the axle to get us at least to the next town. And that's just, in an area where the government doesn't work very well and there's all these kind of challenges. It's really inspiring to see how people just problem solve. And again, when you come home, the types of problems that we have here, one, you put them in perspective, like whatever problems I have, I can go to bed at night and lock my door and know that no one's going to be busting through it in the middle of the night. But also like whatever problems I face, I just got to stay calm and try to solve it, and I'll find a way because you've seen people deal with a lot worse. Um, and as far as the approach, I think it is so easy. We people are very visual. And so when you see a person with skin color that's different than yours, with a way of dressing that's different than yours, with a way of talking that's very different than yours, your instinct can be to kind of go into your shell and kind of be defensive. And one of the things that I've learned, whether it was in Spain or Uganda or the Central African Republic, is actually, and you might even be thinking like, I'm from Allegheny County, like I need to kind of be someone else in order to survive. And what I've always learned is just be yourself, but be open, be talkative, be proud of where you come from, be proud of, I mean, the number of conversations that I have had about country music in this part of the world is amazing. I mean, people love Kenny Rogers. The Gambler is like a hugely popular song. And so these things that I kind of thought were like no one in Africa is gonna be interested in country music. They are. You just talk about what you love, you find common ground, and you small talk. And once you do that, no matter how different people look or act at first, you are gonna realize that they're actually there's a lot of common ground there. I would say a couple of things. One is I think one of the things that I regret most about my kind of teens and 20s is as much as I loved growing up in Allegheny County, I often felt like I had to kind of almost run away from that identity in order to survive out in the world. And the older I got, the more I realized that I should be leaning in to where I'm from, leaning into the way that I was raised, leaning in to the kind of skills that I developed when I grew up, because those are strengths. And I think, depending on where you look in our society now, it can be very easy to kind of see growing up in a relatively economically impoverished county like Allegheny County as this kind of anchor on your prospects and to kind of view this is a rural area, there's no opportunities here, but the thing is if you grow up in Allegheny County, you are resilient, you are tough, and you know how to go to school one day and then, whether it's like tinkering with your uncle in his garage or playing sports in difficult conditions or whatever, like growing up in Allegheny County is actually preparing you for whatever future you want, whether that's in humanitarian work or not. So don't run away from that. Actually build on that. And as you get out in the wider world, you know, I have always found that, kind of the openness that I have and the willingness to talk and chit chat, again, something that I learned from growing up in a region where, you always talk to your neighbors because you're in an area where government services might not always be responsive. So it's your neighbors that you're going to have to rely on. And I think things like that are so helpful. So again, it took me traveling halfway across the world to really fully appreciate the value of a place like Allegheny County, but that's definitely where I've ended up.